Hi everybody, welcome to a new edition of Let's Talk About Education with Antonio Corrales. We have talked in this show before about what does it mean to manage an educational program at a school, at a university, or any organization. But what does it mean to be the superintendent of a large school district? Well, today we have the honor to have with us Dr. Kirk Lewis, who is a seasoned educator, university professor, and a former superintendent in a large school district. He's going to tell us in simple terms what does it mean to be a superintendent in a large district, and what does it entail for people's lives. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Enjoyable. I'm looking forward to it.
Absolutely. Why don't we start by letting you introduce yourself to the audience and kind of letting them know, how do you get to where you are in your career?
Okay. My career path is very different. It's a very non-traditional path. When I graduated from Texas Tech University, I had no concept of ever being a superintendent. That just wasn't on the horizon. My degree was in advertising and public relations.
Wow.
And I knew I wanted my career to be in PR. And so that's where it started. And I worked at the university level in PR for a number of years, and then went out into the business world doing advertising and marketing for a company here in Houston.
Okay.
And really felt like I wasn't giving anything back to a community by doing that. It was a very profit-motivated kind of environment, and it just wasn't where my heart is.
Okay.
So I did that for about 5 years.
Okay.
And decided I needed a change. And ended up getting a job as an administrative assistant to the superintendent in Pasadena,
Okay.
ISD. And that job was primarily a PR job,
Okay.
that and policy development. And so those two things were kind of in my ballpark at that moment. And as I began working in the school district, I realized this is my environment. This is where I needed to be,
Where your heart
because
was, yeah.
it was giving back to a community. It was impacting the lives of kids in a remote way anyway. Mm-hmm. And so I felt good about being there, and really just kind of started developing in a different way in my mindset and my heart about what I wanted to do with my career. But still had no visions of being a superintendent. It just wasn't on the horizon.
Now, for our viewers who may be outside Texas, how many students do we have in Pasadena? More or less.
When I started there, 35,000. When I left, there were almost 56,000.
Wow. And it's one of the biggest in the nation, right?
It was about number 90 in the country, and about 14 here in Texas.
Wow.
So it is a big school district compared to a lot of others anyway. And so I did that work for about 20 years, just pretty much straight PR. And about every 7 years or so, I'd get a little bored with it, and I'd go to the superintendent and say, look, give me something else. What else can I do to help you, to help the district? And so they would give me another area of responsibility, community relations, foundations, whatever it might have been. And then I had an opportunity. Another school district came wanting me to do PR for them in a larger district. And it was one of those, for my family, I had to really think about it. I'd already been in the district 20 years and loved it, but I just didn't, I needed to take care of family issues because my kids were about to go to college, etc. And so when I talked to this other district, I told my superintendent what I was doing, and he came back and said, well, whatever they share with you, give me a chance to respond to it first. And I said, okay. And so it ended up, I became a deputy superintendent at that point in Pasadena, and the responsibilities they gave me there at that time were anything other than curriculum and instruction. Okay. So I had business, I had transportation, maintenance,
all the operational
all
side.
Of the ancillary
Which
sides.
is a big deal.
It was a nice challenge for me, and I did that for about 4 years. And then the superintendent told me at one point, he said, I'm going to retire in the next 18 months. And then he said, you need to be thinking about whether you want to be superintendent or not, because I think you could do this job very well. That was the first time in my life I'd ever even thought about it. For 25 years, I had worked next door to the superintendent. I knew what was going on in that office. I knew the stress that position carried with it, the responsibility that was within that office. And there was nothing in my heart that said that's where I need to be. I just didn't want to touch it. And then when he shared that with me, it made me start thinking. I said, well, is this where God wants me to serve? Is this what he wants me to do? And so after a lot of thought, I decided, well, if I'm going to do this, I need to prepare myself a little bit for it, even if it doesn't happen. So I enrolled in a doctoral program in Lamar, and started getting a little bit more information that I needed, particularly learning more about curriculum and instruction.
But that was the area that you wanted to
that was the weakness that I knew I had, and I knew it would, even if I didn't get the job, it would be beneficial to me.
Absolutely.
And so I started that program, and then within the next 4 months, I found out I was going to be superintendent. And so it was very non-traditional, and to walk into that job knowing that you don't know enough about the curriculum instruction was a little bit daunting for me. But it was a challenge that I was willing to address and face, and because it was in a home district that I had been in for most of my adult life, I felt like I knew what was needed, what we needed to accomplish, and I think that's why it kind of worked for us.
That is fantastic. Now, when we look at school districts, Kirk, there's a big difference, and all the research shows that between small, medium, and large school districts. Now, a lot of people may not be familiar with that, but managing a district of the size that you manage is almost like managing a big corporation. And so what can you tell us a little bit about the role of a superintendent in such an environment? I mean, in terms of having a huge budget with a big amount of personnel, staff, students. What about the role? How impactful is the role of the superintendent in such a context?
Our district, we had over 6,000 employees, and so it was, when you look at all the business and industries in the community, it was among the largest, if not the largest, employer in the community. So being a superintendent in that district is a lot like being a CEO of a major corporate firm.
Exactly.
And because there's so many people that have their hands in the operational aspects of a school district, part of what I think a superintendent in a large district particularly needs to be able to do is establish a vision of what he or she wants to accomplish, figure out ways of communicating that to the staff and to the community at large, motivating people to accept and buy into what you're doing, and then providing them resources to make sure they have what they need to make it happen. And then consistently monitoring and adjusting and being flexible about what your plans are in order to make sure that you get the organization where you want it to be. It's a pretty continuous effort. My job, I never thought my job was to mess in the detail, because I couldn't micromanage it, particularly when you don't have the instructional background.
And I was going to ask you that because, I mean, when you look at the research, one of the reasons why small school districts tend to be more effective than large one is because of the bureaucracy and the processes in place and the closure towards students. And now, in your case, what do you do to combat bureaucracy and establish these processes that were more effective?
You empower the teachers and principals to do their work. I think that's the key to it. Any change that happens in the district, any significant change, any progress you have in student achievement and making sure those kids are developing the way they need to develop is going to happen because that teacher in the classroom is making it happen. It's not superintendent.
Correct.
It's that teacher in the classroom, and that teacher in the classroom is only going to be as effective as the leadership of the principal and that administrative team on that campus.
Correct.
And so that team on the campus is absolutely critical and essential to anything you're wanting to accomplish in a large school district or a small school district. So part of what, in my mind, is to allow it to break itself down into those smaller units and allow them to do the work, give them the vision of where you want to go as an organization, and then give them the resource that they need to make it happen and get out of their way.
Correct.
If you've hired the right people and the principals hired the right people, then as long as they know the direction they're going to get you there.
Mm-hmm.
and you have to trust them to get them there.
So well, and I guess especially with your background in PR and communications, I mean, and being a university professor, I'm sure that communication was one of your strengths. So that motivation part, that climate in the organization, was that a big priority for you? Make sure that people were happy in their jobs and.
I don't think the mindset is to make them happy in their
Okay.
jobs. I think the mindset is to make them productive, because productive people feel content with what they're doing. And so as long as you can give them the training they need, that makes them better, people want to get better at the work that they do. So you give them the training they need. You don't short them on the resources as much as humanly possible in the current political environment. You give them what you know they need. You make sure that they understand that they are your priority in addressing the needs of the kids. Then I think they'll follow. But they have to know where they're going. They have to know why they're doing it. The why is so important for any organization to progress. They have to understand why you're wanting them to do this, why you're asking them to work in this
the rationale
way.
behind your action.
And then you have to listen well enough. If they say, that's not going to work real well, then you have to be willing to listen to that and say, okay, you're right. Let's give that a little more time, or let's adjust it a little bit. I hear what you're saying. And I found that a lot of times the reluctance that you might encounter for people to get where you think you need them to go is more an element of the time constraints you're trying to put on them. And so I think one of the strengths that I had, if there were any, was not only could I communicate, but I was patient with that.
Exactly.
You have some superintendents that come in as change agents and say, okay, we're going to do this and we're going to make it happen in 2 years. And you get such pushback when that happens that
they end up getting fired and they happen.
Yeah, and either they made an aggressive move and people grumbled about it that they did it, or they say, okay, I'll just wait them out and I'll do what I have to do and then I'll back off and do what I want to do.
Exactly.
My goal was to say, look, here's where we need to go, and we got 10 years to do it, because that was my commitment.
Well, that gave a lot of people that job security and that sense of belonging to the organization. Now, you're really humble, because how many years you were in that position?
10.
That's almost like a world record in superintendency, because you and I know that superintendents don't last more than 3 years in average. So for the last 10 years in such a large environment, and when you have the thing with communities that large, that you have a lot of politics that you have to navigate. So I want to ask you something about that, because in such a large context, organizational health is a big deal. In terms of having a climate well established to be productive, as you said. In public education, we deal a lot with budget downfalls and legislatures changing the ballgame every 2 years, every 3 years. How do you maintain, from your position, a healthy organization and deal with factors that could be depressing, like budget cuts and such a thing?
Communication, and you being honest and transparent with what you're doing and why you're doing it. I think that's the key to it. People don't like to be surprised any more than superintendents don't like to be surprised by things. You want to know what's coming. And so if we were going to face a difficult year, and we had those in my 10 years, we had years where we had rifts, reduction in force, that we had to lay some people off because budgets were too tight. We would talk about what we wanted to maintain. Here's the core values that we have that we know we're committed to. And so here's the direction I'm going, and here's how it's going to impact folks. And if you're one of those impacted, we're going to do everything we can to either find a new place for you, or help you find another place somewhere else. We're going to be there for you in the process. So the more you communicate with them and are upfront about what's about to happen and what you think might happen, I think the more willing they are to go with you down that path. And if as long as you've never lied to them and
You have that trust.
Yeah, if you build the trust, build the relationships, and the relationships are so key in so many different areas. But if you build a solid professional relationship with people, then I think they'll tend to accept what you're having to do during difficult times.
Now let me piggyback what you were saying about reefs, because we have some for our viewers who are not familiar. When we talk about reefs, it's basically you have to basically cut positions based on budget downfall. Did you feel a backlash in terms of the following year when having to hire for a new position? Because as a school teacher, you never stop moving. Next year you're gonna have new students and you're gonna have to continue hire. Did when you have to go through those processes, the reef and cutting position, the following year, did that affect the district? How do you diminish the affection the following years after experiencing that? Because we have seen other school districts that after going through that, they have a hard time recuperating, because then people don't want to go there because they don't trust it's going to happen. So how do you deal with that factor?
I still think it's communication.
Okay.
And transparency.
Okay.
Once you reduce staff and you get a handle on the budget that year, then the theory behind that is, okay, you've done what you need to do. And so that every year kind of stands on its own in terms of financial commitment.
Correct.
You can plan all you want to, and here's what we're going to do and how we're going to do it, but unless the resources come in from the state or the local tax base, whatever the case may be for your particular district, every year is going to stand on its own, and you may have a good year where you can say, look, we can put more teachers back in, we can provide a little bit more in salaries or in this area, and you just stay committed to the long run to what your vision is, and make sure that your resources are not contrary to that vision, and I think you end up being okay. When you start spending money on things that are ancillary to that vision, and you've laid people off, that's when you start having some issues.
Some backlash from public opinion and all that. Yeah, that makes sense. Sense.
And then the other key part of that, I think, is not only does your school community, your internal community have to understand what's going on and why, your external community has to understand it as well. Your parents and business leaders, they have to know and kind of buy into where you're going and what you're doing and why you're doing it as well, because our teachers live in the community, their husbands and wives are in business somewhere in the community, and so the schools touch almost every aspect of your community. And so if you have not handled your internal communication well, and they go out and start telling people in the community that, well, they're doing this, but they're really doing that.
But they're spending money and other things.
Then you're kind of dead in the water again. So being totally transparent in all areas, I think, is how you navigate difficult times.
Well, basically what you're defining directly is PR. I mean, a lot of it, and for our viewers, I mean, we know that there's a direct connection in resource between the good PR policies in the school district and the student achievement. Was PR, because of your background, a big priority in your administration?
It was probably because it was where my strength fell, and so I tried to use that to my advantage and to our advantage as a district, to communicate well with everybody. So yeah, it is a big role, and whether you're in a small district or a large district, you have to work the politics, you have to do the PR in the community, you have to have people understand what you're doing. In a larger district, a superintendent, because you have so many good people hopefully working under you, handling the nuts and bolts of things, one of your major responsibilities becomes communication and PR, in my opinion. And so if you've got that skill set, you're going to do pretty well. If you don't have that skill set, it's going to be difficult for you. If you can't communicate to your Rotary Club why you need a 2-cent tax rate increase or a 5-penny bond proposal to give you the materials and buildings and things you need, then you're not going to be there very long. And so I think one of the reasons we were able to do so much in 10 years that I was there, and the previous superintendent in the 14 years that he was there, is that we made an effort at communicating and building relationships and creating positive PR for our district, particularly within the community. I cared less about how somebody else might perceive us. I just wanted to make sure we were taking care of the kids in our community in the right way, where they could get to where they wanted to go with their lives after they graduated from high school.
That was your priority. Now, we know that research shows that superintendents tend to spend 70% of their job, of their time in their job, dealing with board relationships, school board relationships. How was your dynamic with the board, and in terms of the time that you used to spend with those relationships during your day, during your job, and what are the keys for having a successful relationship with board members in a large school district, in your opinion?
I was blessed.
Okay.
The board members I had were experienced board members.
Okay.
4 of them had served more than 20 years on the board.
Which, for our viewers who are new in this world, that's important because they know the processes, and they know the policies.
They understood their role, you know, the framework and boundaries of their role,
right.
and
Which is extremely important. Right?
Yeah, and so when you say 70%, I hear that number, and I've heard that number a lot over the years. I don't think I had to spend that kind of time
because of that
building
situation.
that relationship, because they knew so well what they were doing. The other 3 that were on the board had been there for at least 2 terms.
Okay.
So they were knowledgeable. You have to keep them informed. You have to keep them in the loop.
They used to meet with them like every week or prior the board meetings to kind of inform them of areas.
I would send them information. I call them to let them know what was going on if there was a critical situation coming up. We would have periodic workshops, not regularly scheduled, but when we had a need, then we'd call a workshop and give them information that they needed to know. And then we tried to be really thorough with the materials we sent them prior to a normal board meeting, so they already had knowledge of what we were going to be talking about and what we were going to be doing. We set up a good series of evaluation processes in terms of formative evaluations as well as the summative. So we could talk a lot during those formative evaluations about where we're heading and how we were going to get there. And so that helped a lot as well, I think.
Kind of building that trust in the relationship.
And I had been in the district 20 years prior. I knew those board members.
Correct.
We kind of grew up in the system together. So they knew where my heart was and where my head was, and I knew where their heart was and where their head was. So it was a good dynamic, I think, for us. Not every superintendent or school district is that fortunate.
Correct.
Either they have youthful, young, inexperienced board members that are learning, or they have board members with an agenda
that is not aligned to the vision.
And that will take more time for a superintendent to massage and manage that relationship a little bit to make sure that everybody grasps the same vision. But the other thing I learned is that because of their experience, I needed to listen to them. Right. If I was proposing something and they said, I don't know how that's going to set with the community, then I would say, who do I need to go talk to? Yeah. What are the issues that you perceive from the community, so I can address those up front and early, so we don't get sidetracked with something.
Correct.
And so I learned to listen, and I valued their advice. And they were very good about not overstepping that line. They would share with me what they thought, what they knew, what they heard in the community, but they didn't tell me, okay, now go do this.
Correct. It was a horizontal relationship. So
yes, it was. Good team of 8 setting is
that's
what
awesome.
That's
awesome. Now, what about for our viewers who are not familiar with Pasadena? What is the percentage of economically disadvantaged students in Pasadena back in the day?
Percentage of economically disadvantaged kids was around 80%.
80%.
Yeah.
So that's huge. How do you approach such a situation? Because one of the things that for our viewers to know is Pasadena is one of the highest performer school districts in Texas, with 80% economically disadvantaged students, which is a tremendous accomplishment for a school district like that. So, what was your approach having such a high percentage of economic disadvantaged students, which you and I know that implies a lot of dysfunctionality at home in many cases, or a lot of struggles, even for food, housing,
Sure.
and of course academics.
Sure. I think the real key to it was finding teachers with the heart for those kind of kids who we knew were coming with a different kind of background than maybe what we grew up with. That's probably the key to it, because if your teachers are passionate about taking care of kids, then your kids are going to be taken care of. But we set as a goal early on in the district, and I carried it on when I was superintendent, to address those needs. Back in the 80s, we weren't doing a very good job of that. When I first came to the district, our disadvantaged kids were struggling. And we began to make a commitment to change the way we taught, to change the way we thought about things, in order to make sure that those kids' needs were being met.
So a lot of training and professional development.
A lot of training and professional development. That's probably one of the keys to it. But every child, regardless of where they came from, has a dream about where they want life to take them. And sometimes that dream is limited. And so part of our role is to make sure that they see a broader horizon of what they can be in life, and then to start giving them skill sets to recognize that, okay, I can do that. I can move beyond that. When I first became superintendent, people from the community, broad community, came to me and said, we really need more tradespeople, and we want your district to be that district that provides those trades, because they thought ours are poor kids, that's where they're going to go, they're not going to go to college.
Correct.
So we need to do that for them. And I said, no, my first priority is to make sure that they can do anything they want to do. If they want to go to college, we can get them ready to go to college. If they want to go to postgraduate degrees and become doctors and lawyers or whatever, they're going to have that understanding that they can achieve that if they wish. Once they have that mindset, then we'll build all the trade programs we can, because I know there's a need there. But don't
label them,
pigeonhole them into that until they know that that's what they want to do. And they community bought into that and said, okay, let's get it done. So we started with the early college, high school, with really a strong emphasis on dual credit, advanced placement, because these kids, knowing that they could not afford 4 years of college easily,
they can save a lot of money with the dual credit.
If we can install those programs within our own budget to make that work for them, then they can start seeing that broader horizon open up. And we did that for like the first 5 years. We really pushed college readiness as a concept for kids, and
which by the time actually was really revolutionary, because now everybody talk about career and college readiness, but back in the day it wasn't such a popular term,
particularly in a high poverty community. So those first 5 years we focused on that and got that going pretty well. And then I said, okay, now it's time to look at what we can do to really start meeting the needs of the community in terms of career readiness, and what our community needed to make that happen. So we put those pieces in place at that point. And now our kids go through there knowing they have options. And for those that need to get out of high school and help their family with a job, they can do that, but they also know I can go to college and start working on a degree.
It's their decision. It's not a label that they were put in.
Yeah, they have options now.
That's awesome.
And that's what I wanted for our kids. And too many times our kids from poverty don't recognize that they have options. Their first thought as they get older is, okay, I just need to go to work.
How do I pay bills?
Yeah, how do I pay bills? How do I help my parents? How do I keep our family together, that kind of thing. And then to help them and start seeing their own mindset change that says, I can really break this cycle. I can really step out of this life and help my parents even better if I do something else. That really hits, it really hits, and that's what we tried to do. And I think our teachers and our principals had that commitment to such a point where they made it happen, and it was just so rewarding to watch to stand back and watch what was happening in those classrooms for those kids, because many of our kids now, our graduation rate when I started as superintendent was about 69% high school graduation rate. By the time I left, we were just under 90, and they've broken 90 now.
That is
so
fantastic.
Our kids know that they can do what they want to do, and that makes all the difference in the world.
That is fantastic. Now, piggyback on that, what about your daily job? I mean, what are the most fun part of your job, or what are the most challenging part of your job? If you any day when you used to be there, any particular day of your job, I guess I'm imagining it wasn't the same day every day.
No, it was never the same every day, but almost part of the part that's not real fun is particularly in that role is just life. Life is a series of meetings. And I was always one when I wasn't superintendent. I wanted the meeting to mean something and to have a beginning and an end and a conclusion. And so I tried to keep that in mind when I was superintendent. I'm sure I didn't do that very well, but it just seemed like that I was always going from one meeting to another, and that can be very frustrating at times. The people issues that you have to deal with, those are those
HR,
human dynamics, those HR issues, those were the things that would eat at you almost every day. The fun part was dreaming and planning and envisioning with the team about where we wanted to go and how we were going to get there, and watching those systems develop and be put in place, and then seeing those things work for our kids. And watching those lives change. You couldn't beat any of that. And on the rare occasion that I had, and I say rare, I tried to do it every week at least at some point, get into one of the schools and just watch what was going on and visit with the kids a little bit. Those elementary kids will keep you humble in a hurry. And high school kids and intermediate kids will challenge you. So
for our viewers to understand why it was a challenge to visit, how many elementary schools do you have to have?
We had 60 elementary schools.
Exactly. So basically you will have to, and you have a lot of middle school, a lot of high school. So it was a challenge just to visit at least once a year.
And we had 60 total schools. We had 37 elementary schools by the time I left. So it was one of those things where you tried to hit them as often as you could, and if you found a spare minute, then you would go out. If you needed to pick me up, you'd go out and look at the schools and visit the kids. But watching all that unfold was probably what was most rewarding to me.
Rewarding part. Now to finalize, Kirk, how do you see the future of public school districts and public education in general in America within the next years? How do you envision?
Man, it's tougher. It's tougher now than it's ever been. There's this country has kind of evolved into an era of distrust of everything, and that's a shame. When you get things down to the local level, people generally trust because they know you, but then you hear the conversation globally about public ed or any other aspect of life, and people are very critical of those things. It is disappointing to me that we see so many politicians pushing against public ed, thinking there's a better alternative. I don't think there's a better alternative anywhere in the world than public ed. There's a place for private schools. There's probably even a place for charter schools. But that cannot be the primary emphasis of any state or any state budget. The priority needs to go to public ed because that's where the vast majority of kids are going to be served. And there, for the last 15 years, there seems to be this incremental shift and design by some Machiavellian design out there to destroy public ed.
Like a war against public ed.
And I don't know why, other than you follow the money and start seeing what, who's going to benefit from the charter expansion, who's going to do all these other things.
And the vouchers and all that.
And that's sad to me. But where the rubber meets the road and where kids are actually in class learning. I think kids are getting better education today than they've ever gotten, and I think that's a tribute to the educational development and professional growth of our educators who come into programs like the one you offer and learn a little bit more about what needs to be done and how it can be done. So university training is, I think, critical for our teachers and our principals and upper staff. All that together, I think that what happened it's very promising for what's happening in the classroom. I'll say it that way.
Yeah.
What's happening beyond the classroom that
the
superintendents have to deal with.
Yeah.
That's getting tougher and tougher and tougher. I think the cycle of overemphasis on testing is about to break, and it needs to break.
It needs to break.
We need to do some testing. We need to be able to evaluate our kids, but to put kind of those high stakes measures on it doesn't make a lot of sense.
And all that money on that.
Yeah, all that money. None of that makes good sense to me.
Yeah.
And I think that cycle may be about to change, which is a good thing for public ed. But generally what I see happening in the classroom is very positive, very good. It's tough job to do every day, but they're doing it well. It's just all that other stuff that gets in the way now.
Yeah. Okay, I want to thank you one more time for being with us today.
Oh, I enjoyed it. It was a good visit.
Folks, so there, remember that we have this interview and many others in Antonio Corrales YouTube channel. Let's talk about education with Antonio Corrales and StarlingEvaluationAssessment.com. Please help somebody today and see you next time.